morning, church. Just a side note to pick up on something that Gail just said. Has nothing to do with the message today. But it goes along with recognizing the presence of God every moment of where we are. I got subpoenaed, and I had to go to court this week. There was one of the parolees who was making claims against myself and other agents that he was wrongfully being incarcerated. So we had to drive up to Miami County, go to court, and go through this legal proceeding. Needless to say, I was a little uptight about that process. Never been through that process before, and so I'm sitting in Miami court. I got my ball cap in my lap that I wear when I'm on duty, and on the back of my ball cap I have a patch, a Velcro patch, and it says, "In God We Trust." And so I'm sitting there listening to the lawyers do their thing, not understanding anything that they're talking about because it ain't like it is on TV. And I'm staring at my hat, and I'm going, "Okay, Lord, I'll trust you. Okay, Lord, here we go. You got this." And whatever that looks like for each of us, we have to keep our eyes open for where God is and how He's moving in our lives, and He's got it. He's got it. This morning, I want us to talk a little bit about following Jesus and what does it look like to follow Jesus. And we're continuing with our study of Deuteronomy. And do you guys remember this? Some of you younger folks don't know what this is. This is a Polaroid camera. Right? It's an instant camera where you would slap this cartridge in, take a picture, and it would spit it out, and you would have it in about a minute or two. Well, I'm going to offer that Deuteronomy 6 in particular is a little bit like that. It's a snapshot of what it means to look, what it looks like to follow God. And we find all the way through Scripture, whether it be the Old Testament or the New Testament, we find these character sketches. We find these examples, these Polaroid snapshots, or to use today's vernacular, today's language, it would be a Snapchat or an Instagram hashtag following Jesus. The Bible's full of them, of examples of what it means to follow Jesus. And so, what I want us to think about this morning is, many times we like to think that we can just add Jesus to our resume. We can add Jesus to our already successful life. So, all right, I've graduated high school. Check. I'm going to college to get mom and dad off my back. Check. I'm going to land that awesome job that I've always wanted to do. Check. Oh, now I get to make some money. I'm in that season where I get to make some money. Check. Then I want to meet somebody and I want to get married. Check. I want to have some kids. According to the statistics, I want to have 2.5 kids. I don't really know how you do that, but I want to have some kids. I want to get a little house. We all have these plans, right? Well, many times we try to just add Jesus to this game plan that we have. To just bring Jesus into this plan for our lives that we have. Like it's adding Jesus like it's one more ball to juggle or one more friend to follow on Twitter. And I love this comic that I found a few years ago about, no, I'm not talking about Twitter. I literally want you to follow me. I think it speaks to where we are today. Well, we're not supposed to just add Jesus to what we're already doing. That's not how it works. That's not how God works. He doesn't let us add him to our existing life as we so see it. So I want to illustrate this, and then we're actually going to turn to the text, and we're going to see what the text has to say. But let me give you a foretaste of what's going to happen in about 2 weeks. And I didn't realize Raven was going to be in here, so she gets to hear a funny story about what's probably going to happen. So, not this coming week, but the following week, we're going glamping. That's when you go camping in an RV. So we're going to go glamping with my mom, and we're going to go to this church camp down in southern Indiana, and we're going to be there all week long. And so, undoubtedly, I'm guessing we might make it 24 hours. We might be there a day before Raven says, let's go swimming in the lake. Because she loves to swim, right? And I'm going to have to make the decision. Am I gonna do the nesty plunge thing? Again, some of you younger folks don't have any idea what I'm talking about. Am I going to do the nesty plunge thing and just get wet and deal with the cold water right out of the gate? Or am I going to, try to wade in and tiptoe into the water and gradually get used to it? Well, following Jesus is a little bit like that. Because if we try to tiptoe down the steps and wade into following Jesus, we're going to find ourselves frustrated. Because God just doesn't work that way. God wants all or nothing. You're either with me or you're not. And so, when we think about following Jesus, I want us to read Deuteronomy. Let me back up because I missed reading Deuteronomy 6 earlier. Let me read that for us. Deuteronomy 6, starting in verse 4, is what we were talking about in Sunday school, or at least a portion of it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. That's what it means to follow Jesus. Is recognizing, listening to him, recognizing when he's speaking to us, and responding to that. As Gail was saying, part of that is recognizing his presence where we're at. And then whatever it is, wherever we're at, that he's saying, do this or don't do that, then I have a choice to respond to that. Well, when we follow Jesus, I want us to look at what the Scriptures have given us as some examples on what does it mean and what does it look like to follow Jesus. And today's one of those rare days when there will be a lot of reading that I'm gonna do. Been having more and more of those lately, but so I'm going to be in Deuteronomy 11, and I'm going to read verses 8 through 21 for us. And then we'll unpack that just a little bit. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 8. Observe, therefore, all the commands I am giving you today, so that you may have the strength to go in and take over the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, and so that you may live long in the land that the Lord swore to your forefathers to give to them and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. The land you are entering to take over is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come. where you planted your seed and irrigated it by foot, as in a vegetable garden. But the land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It is a land the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are continually on it, from the beginning of the year to its end. So, if you faithfully obey the commands I am giving you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, then I will send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine and oil. I will provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods, and to bow down to them. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will shut the heavens so that it will not rain on the ground, and the ground will yield no produce. And you will soon perish from the good land the Lord is giving you. Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land that the Lord swore to give to your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. In the verses prior to what I just read, God's people are being reminded about, here's what generations before you experienced personally. Here's what you all went through, or your forefathers went through. Because remember, they're standing ready to cross the promised land. And so he's reminding them what they have seen and what they have experienced. And God is saying to his people, you've seen, you've tasted that I'm good. Now trust and follow me. Trust and follow me. And our proper response when we hear God say, trust and follow me, is to hear and to heed. That's what that whole Shema thing is about, is to hear, be listening for God, and then to heed. Hearing and do it. Hearing and do it. And so these are some of the snapshots that you and I have that have been collected in the Bible for us to actually learn from, for us to incorporate into our lives. Observe the commandments that I'm telling you. God's saying, faithfully live my way. And I will lead you into a life of provision and a life of plenty. That's what he describes there when he's talking about the rains coming in the right times, in the right amounts, grass for cattle, that we will eat, we will be satisfied. But notice, there's a connection. If you look at the end of verse 15, it says, I will provide grass in the field for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. Notice the connection to the very next verse, verse 16, where it says, do not be distracted or do not be enticed, or you will perish in the land of plenty. We literally can be in the promised land with a bounty around us, and we can perish because we have been enticed to follow other gods. And I just find it interesting that it's when we're satisfied. When we get comfortable. When we stop listening for God, when we stop focusing and searching for Him in where He's at in this moment, we stop following, when we're satisfied with where we're at, then we get distracted. Then we get tempted to follow other gods. Let me interject with a little bit of personal testimony here about, because I want to come back to this fantasy, this idea of that you and I have of having these grand plans for our lives. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on dreaming big. In fact, I encourage all the folks around me that I love to dream big. And the reason why I encourage people to dream big is because rarely will we think or dream beyond the things that you and I can actually accomplish, me, myself, and I. But when we think and dream big, we get to this place where we can't get it done. And God's got to be involved. And so I always encourage those kinds of big, hairy goals. Because if I can't do it, God's got to show up to get it done. That's not what I'm talking about in terms of dreaming and having plans for our lives. Let me tell you a little bit about what my plan was in my life. You know, I had these boyhood dreams of being a fireman or being a stuntman. And after those passed, then I fixated on becoming an architect. And that stuck all through junior and senior high. And so I'm taking drafting classes and things, but school was not for me when I was younger. All right. I spent more time in the principal's office, getting in trouble, being expelled from school. I was on the trajectory that would land me to become incarcerated, so I'd have to come see the current me as a parole agent, all right? That's where I was headed, very clearly. So after high school, I go into the Army, and I go into the Army for the sole purpose of getting college money. And so, because I knew I wanted to go to architecture school. And so I go to the Army, and I learn a few things about authority, and I actually get kicked out of the Army for being fat. True story. And as I come home from the Army, I sort of slide right back into the old life. I start working in a restaurant. I'm hanging with my old crew. You know, it's sex, drugs, rock and roll. It is the same stuff that was going on before I left for the Army. And I'm just going nowhere fast. And about that time, Lori and I meet, and we end up getting married. And I apply to Ball State, and I get accepted to Ball State. Now, like I told you a minute ago, I'm a C/D student at best in high school when I showed up. And so I didn't get accepted into the College of Architecture and Planning. I got accepted to Ball State, but I've got no SAT scores, no ACT scores. I'm much older, and the grades that I do have are terrible. And I'm competing against high schoolers who are at the top of their game. So I didn't get into the College of Architecture and Planning. And I spent a year actually getting into that program. So that's a 5-year program. So now I'm in school for 6 years. I graduate, and I graduate at the top of my class. And then I get into the workforce, and I think this is great. I'm at a place where, wow, there's just a lot of stuff going on. I've got the ability. Things are really looking up because now I've got this awesome job. I'm going to make some money. It's sort of the fame, fortune, everything's flowing right, you know. I'm kicking it in this firm. I've got these big plans of owning my own architecture practice at some point in time. You know, Lori and I have all these long pillow talk conversations about the type of architecture I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be saving the world. All these plans, right? And I think, you know, I got this gorgeous wife. We're going to have some babies. We're going to buy a house. You know, it's the American dream, right? It's what everybody does. Everyone comes up with these plans. Well, about that time, that's when God gets a hold of me. And you all have heard that story about how God sucker punched me with rock and roll and chocolate to actually draw me to Him. But after he got my attention, after I gave my life to Him, then step by step He began to change me. And after that moment, shortly thereafter, next thing you know, I'm leading men's groups at churches. You know, and I'm feeling about up to here. I'm feeling like I'm in the deep end of the pool. Oh, you know, I'm a baby here. I'm just gave my life to Christ. What am I doing leading, right? Well, it was enough that I could dog paddle. I could move forward. Well, then it's not long after that, I find myself enrolled at Crossroads Bible College. I don't know why. The only thing I can explain why is because God told me to do it. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And it was just enough. It wasn't too much. It wasn't too big of a step. It was just enough that I could manage it. And I thought that it was for some other reason. You know, God's not showing all His cards. So I play along with it. And then next thing you know, the master's program comes along. He says, do that. And again, I'm like, but it's not too much. I can manage it. Okay, Lord. I don't know how. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how we're going to pay for it. But I know that You've got this. I trust You, so I'll take this next step. Well, then God pulls this right turn, Clyde kind of moment. All right? And the world of architecture comes to an abrupt stop. And now I'm unemployed or underemployed for 14 months. And you all remember that season. And so at the end of that season, now there's this opportunity to volunteer. Volunteer to returning citizens. And I find myself being used by God to birth something that's never been done before. This mentoring program for parolees who are coming back. And I'm doing all this for free. You know, I'm unemployed or underemployed, but God says, yeah, this is what I want you doing. So I get engaged to do it. And that's when He opens a door. He opens the door to parole. But then I'm faced with a decision. I'm faced with a decision of, am I going to pursue the false security that comes with, I've got a good job? Or am I going to follow Jesus? Because remember what the Scripture says there in verse 16. It says, be careful, you will be enticed to turn away and follow other gods. And I had to make a decision. Am I going to walk away from a career in architecture, making fat money, to become a civil servant and try to live on a third, less than a third of what we had come to live on? What am I going to do? Am I going to go for supposed security over here? Or am I going to follow Jesus? Well, we know the answer to that. I chose to follow Him. I chose to walk through that door of parole. And God continues to provide. We live in that promised land where we have our needs met. Even when we don't necessarily know how the mortgage payment's going to get paid, God gets it done every time. But Proverbs 16:9 explains some of that for us, because it explains that a man plans his way, but God, the Lord, directs his steps. There comes a time where you and I, when we realize that we are not really in control. We think we are, and that's why we make all these plans for our lives. That we're going to master plan out this awesome life that I'm going to have. And then we realize that, you know what? God's really the one who's orchestrating these steps. And I have the choice. Am I going to see that and acknowledge that and humble myself and follow and go along with those steps that he's putting out in front of me? Or am I going to go my own way? Because I do have that choice. I have the choice through free will. I have the choice to disobey. But if I choose to follow, then I'm going to discover that there's this amazing promise land. And that this promised land is rich in blessings. Now, those blessings aren't always a cushy bank account. They're not always food in the refrigerator. They're not always having the coolest phone or the best car. But our needs are met. We want for nothing. We need nothing. Which brings me back to chapter 11. And the biblical principle of blessings and curses. So let me read a little bit more here in chapter 11. Now we're picking it up in verses 22 through 28. If you carefully observe all these commands I'm giving you to follow, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to hold fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations larger and stronger than you. Every place where you set your foot will be yours. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the Euphrates River to the western sea. No man will be able to stand against you. The Lord your God, as he promised you, will put the terror and fear of you on the whole land wherever you go. See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. The curse, if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I command you today by following other gods, which you have not known. Now, we actually have to turn to chapter 30 to have these blessings and these curses unpacked. And that's where we're going to go now, is Deuteronomy 30, chapter 30, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 10. When all these blessings and curses I have set before you come upon you, and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God, and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I have commanded you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes, and have compassion on you, and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you, even if you have been banished to the most distant land under the heavens. From there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your fathers, and you will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. The Lord your God will put all these curses on your enemies who hate and persecute you. You will again obey the Lord and follow all his commands I am giving you today. Then the Lord your God will make you most prosperous in all the work of your hands and in the fruit of your womb, the young of your livestock and the crops of your land. The Lord will again delight in you and make you prosperous, just as he delighted in your fathers. If you obey the Lord your God and keep his commands and decrees that are written in his book of the law, and turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. What we learned is that there is prosperity when we turn to the Lord. I like the way Pastor Ed used to say it. As you know, Pastor Ed loved Psalm 23. And he would say, we are well cared for by the shepherd. That's what he was talking about. When we're following God, when we're keeping our eyes on the shepherd and following where he's leading us, we are well cared for. The other thing that I learned from that particular passage as we look at those blessings and those curses is that there is no one that is too far gone for the Lord. Even people who are in the most distant lands, who've been banished. In this case, as the exile happens, as God's people were broken up and taken all across the earth, there's no place that you and I can go, and there's no one who can go beyond the reach of God, that if we will turn to him, he will bring us back. And he'll bring us back into that prosperity, up under his care. I also like in verse 6 there where it talks about we will have circumcised hearts. God will prepare us so that we can actually love him the way we're supposed to, if we will turn to him. And then the last part of those verses, as we look at blessings and curses, is when we choose God, when we choose blessings, God is delighted when we faithfully obey. So when we do what God wants us to do, when we listen to him and respond to him, God is delighted. So my question for all of us this morning is, what does it look like for you to follow Jesus? What is it that God is calling you away from? Or what is it that God is calling you into? Because we all have to be listening for that. And there might be someone here today, just like me, when I was sitting in a church service, not the first church service I'd ever went to, but the first time I actually heard God tug on me. There might be somebody sitting here today and they're experiencing that tug for the very first time. And 2 Peter 3:9 tells us that God is slow to keep his promises because he wants all of his children to come to know him. He wants all of his children to respond. So just like last week when we were talking about the Shema, Hear, O Israel. Hear and respond. Hear and heed. That's the first thing we have to do. Is we got to hear Him for the first time. We got to turn to Him for the first time and say, I accept you, Lord. But others may be here this morning, and God may be calling you out of that false security, out into His plan for your life. Remember Peter walking on the water? He had to leave known security or perceived security to go to follow Jesus and do what God wanted him to do. Sometimes God calls us away from the things that we think got us squared away. Health insurance, retirement accounts, and paycheck that's coming every 2 weeks that I can count on. It's going to be this amount of money. Sometimes God's like, those things are great. Those are blessings. But don't put them before me. Lean on me first. And other times, He's just trying to get you and I to take the next small step. Because just like I explained as I talked about my plan, He just kept having me take small steps. Small steps. And I didn't really know about it at the time, but then there's the next small step. And there's the next small step. And you look back and you go, how did that happen? How am I here today? How am I an elder in a church, been preaching for a year and a half, have a master's degree? How did any of that happen? Because that was not my plan. My plan was over here. And it's just these small steps. And God gets us exactly where He wants us to be. To do the exact same thing that we were made to do. But we may have other plans. And if we give God the la, 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 and go on about our plans, then He intervenes. And He brings down those house of card plans if we won't follow Him step by step. He'll let us make a mess and wait for us to hit bottom and then realize, I guess that wasn't the plan I was supposed to be following. So, as we follow Jesus, we need to remember that following Jesus, it's not measured in accomplishments or arrivals. It's measured in ordinary, not so glitzy steps. Just steps. It's not, can I stay married for 60 years? It's not, can I build a business for 30 years? No, it's, can I follow Jesus for the next 5 minutes? Can I focus on Him, listen for Him, and follow Him in the next 5 minutes? Can I take the step that He's calling me to right here, right now? And what we come to realize is that we might be following Jesus if we're focusing on Him and all you can see is the next step right in front of you. There's no plan. There's no how do we get from here to there. I got that one right there. And that's all He gives me. If you're here today and you're struggling, there might be family drama going on in your life. There might be, cash flow is tight. Work is, well, it's work. It's no longer a passion, a joy. It's just a job. Well, then I ask, can you love that EGR in front of you? That person who is an extra grace required person. Can you love that person for 5 more minutes? Love them like Jesus for 5 more minutes. Can you trust in God's provision to get whatever that bill is that's looming over your head of how's that one going to get paid? Can we trust in His provision for that? Can we trust God for the next 5 minutes? Because if we can do that, if we can trust Him for the next 5 minutes, then welcome to the way the rest of Jesus' followers successfully make it through life. It's following Jesus in 30-second intervals. It's how He unfolds our life. Jesus divvies life out in little 30-second intervals there. Are you going to listen to me? Can you hear me? And if so, are you going to do what I'm asking you to do in this little 30-second interval, in this 5-minute interval? That's what it means to follow Jesus. That's what it means in Deuteronomy to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. To put Him first, to listen and obey.